I don't know when my camera cut off, but my camera is cut off again. But I had basically filmed this beautiful part of the park. And some of these beautiful homes. I'm sure these homes have, gone so far up in cost that God knows what these people are doing to afford these kind of homes. Look like they're building another structure there. I want to say it's some kind of house. It's okay. So yeah, I'm kind of wondering if I should get another dog. I really am. Because even when I think about traveling or moving abroad, it's just that things are so volatile, you know. Even, places that, at one time, may have seemed like they were affordable, and that with supply and demand, and people go in to live in these other places, then the price goes up. And I've seen that happening. And somehow or another, I just can't see myself, paying, close to what it costs to live here in the States and getting less benefits, less protection, less freedom. So it would definitely have to be something that would, be investigated thoroughly. Okay. And I definitely would be taken back, if I was, if I was being charged, an equivalent rate to based off of the fact that you know, I'm American, and they upcharge me. So that's like a tariff, right? That's like a tariff, that upcharge, and then they say they do it because, you know, they're afraid of gentrification. So those are certain things that, you know, I'm concerned about. So yeah. Ooh, it's starting to get hot already. Oh, damn. On the bridge? So, I was watching these guys build here, and this new structure, it has, here, those are individual, like slabs that they're using. It looks like slabs that are about, 3 by 5 slabs. Kinda puts you in that frame of mind of modular type of construction. It's weird how I can watch people work all day. I can watch people work all day. So, this is to let you know that I'm very sensitive when it comes to this revolution, right? And I am truly aware that, signals, broadcasted signals are being picked up by people uh, who have schizophrenia. And that's a problem. It is. It's a problem. Um, but that doesn't negate the fact that, we also have to be cognizant that women need to be a protective class. They are the ones that bring human life, onto this planet. Irregardless, as to whether or not she wants to fulfill those duties, it could be any woman that fulfills that duty, at any time, right? Because, push come to shove, you can reverse, uh, the aging effect of a woman's womb. And, we've shown where, grandmas, in their 70s, were carrying, the baby of, their child in their womb. They wasn't going to raise the child, but they were just carrying the baby, right? And there are going to be women out there that, thought that they was going to meet, the love of their life and have that, nuclear family and raise their child with, somebody that they love and that they're in love with, that loves them back. Okay. The projects, I believe was supposed to be, that safe haven for single parents, but definitely had, got, invaded, infiltrated, with, temptations and incentives, and sometimes coercion or extortion, who knows. Yeah. Why they didn't provide protection in the projects, I don't know. Right? The project should have been set up much like, those rich homes that, have, security guards and armed police officers. Especially if they were designed specifically for women with children. Now, a long time ago, they used to have a lot of orphanages. They used to have a lot of I guess you would call them like homes for nuns, and they don't really have a lot of those anymore. And they're not even really sponsored anymore. They're not. Um, I think they were saying like the highest pension plan, I mean, salary for a nun was something like $1,500, something like that. So they were pretty much living off of welfare for sure, and they had to work for it. In my world, it would be totally different, right? Because my world would be, based off of, protecting the children, until they can become adults, period. And, it goes beyond, just a woman. And they kind of had that same notion when they were talking about, yes, it takes a village, right? However, when things started getting so expensive, it takes more than a village. It takes paid security personnel. Right? Because it's one thing, to be a volunteer, to be a witness, and that gets really complicated because, you don't want to be a known witness against against a criminal in court. You might not make it. You might not make it through, the trial. Yeah. So, that's why, the problem, begins with men, having to be reprogrammed. And the men, coming to the terms, that when, they reach a certain age, that they need to realize that, they too are going to be a mere citizen, and they should be civilized. They're a civilian, right? They're doing everything in their power, not to make men sterile, right? And I was watching this video where women were having a conversation, why aren't the men being required to take birth control? Right? You don't want to have babies. You say you don't want to have babies, but the men don't want to have birth control. The women are going to continue to have birth control, but both of them should be on birth control. But the men were like, oh no, since you're going to have birth control, then I don't need to have birth control. And it's just like, yeah, but the woman's birth control is really not, 100%, effective. So I thought that was a very, very, important question that really needs to be addressed. Like these men are saying, they don't really have plans to get married. And yet they're not saying that they don't have plans to not have sex. So if you don't have plans to get married, why aren't you on birth control? they could be on vasectomies, clear until the time that they decide, they want to settle down, and then they can reverse the vasectomy, and yeah. That's one option. The other option is, I'm sure they got different options. That's something that I might have to look up. The condoms. They make it seem like that's too expensive and too time consuming. There's just no excuse. Period. That men are out here running around willy-nilly, not wanting children, and yet, not being held accountable for not being on birth control. And, not wanting to take care of the children, once they are here. So it's like I said, the men, they get coddled. The men and even though they're getting coddled, at the same time, their labor is being replaced by automation and robots. So I don't see, how men can possibly think that that this is going to be a winning situation for them. That dude on the motorcycle, he went completely through a red light, and he's no more than 500 feet away from the police department. So with all compassion, when you're faced with being obsolete or on the verge of extinction, you're gonna have to recognize that it's your job to make yourself viable. That it's your job, to stop this notion that, you don't need to contribute to society, because society, they don't have to be charitable. Right? There's a lot of younger men out here who are saying, they want help from women. The older men, they're like, nah, they already have a plan. They think their plan is going to be indefinite, and sustain them, until they get, old and gone. And yet, a lot of these, a lot of the traditional ways that, people used to behave has changed, right? At one time, they may have been able to marry, a woman half their age, like according to the Elijah, right? Muhammad, right? Where he was telling men, marry a woman half your age, and that way, you'll fully be mature into your manhood, and you'll have a woman willing, to take care of you. Well, women, they're just tired of taking care of men. Period. They're tired of taking care of men. Why would they take care of a man that all he wants to do is use leverage? There's no love. It was just a marriage of convenience. Outdated notions that have proven to be a failed plan. We have men every day talking about holidays aren't the same. The lack of contribution of the woman, is affecting them severely. And it never should have had to come to this kind of standoff. It never should have had to come to that. But when the conversations was always you telling the woman what she's supposed to think, you telling the woman how she's supposed to feel, you telling the woman that, you having sex with her makes her feel good, and she says it doesn't. You're not listening. And that brings me to that, that part of the Bible where they were talking about, the lack of submission, right? I think, men, like to do unnatural sex activities, and women are just, they're not with it. Cosplay, maybe they'll indulge in that, get dressed up like the French maid, something like that. That's cute, but y'all are doing these videotapes, and then you want to sell the videotapes into the black market, try to make money. She doesn't even know that she's been filmed. She doesn't know that you're making extra money because, you have recorded the episode. Or she thought that this was just for y'all's private use, to watch each other, having sex. She didn't know that she was going to sell that onto the, these porn sites. And what happens when, now typically most women, they're not gonna, they're not gonna pay for a porn site, right? Typically, women won't pay for a porn site. Most of the time, women see porn is as a result of a man sharing, the porn that he had bought, and shared that, with her. But now, say her son, is watching porn, and he's seeing his parents, having sex because he's a subscriber to the porn site, or brothers, or fathers, or, you know what I'm saying? You guys need to stop it. And that's just an indicator that you are not a content creator that's a star. But to violate the privacy of people in this way is diabolical. And just because you're not a star to everybody, that doesn't mean that you can't be the star of your own show, right? You can be the star of your own show. I mean, I've seen so many people, they didn't have good looks. They weren't young. They weren't even, what do you call it? Body proportional. I've seen people who were disabled, and yet, they could still get an audience, they still can get a following, and they're still able to make their money. I mean, I was just amazed when there was this one-armed lady, and she was doing tarot cards, and she was also using her foot like a second appendage, and she had a following. She had thousands of people following her. Now, with followers, comes problems. So that's something that I recognize. It's a very it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to be a popular nomad unless you keep on, you stay on the move. If you stay on the move, then yeah, you could be a popular nomad. Okay, but even then, you can become so popular that you get recognized by other people, and that's great, but a lot of those people are usually looking for handouts. They think, you have 100,000 followers, you know, can you spare a dime? Granted, if, you know, you were, you know, putting them in your content, I definitely think that you need to at least buy them a coffee, a lunch, something. You know, I feel that way for sure. I sit up here looking at these two license plates in front of me. One of them is 567, and then this other one directly in front of me is 3456. I'm gonna have to look up those angel numbers, see what that means. You know, those consecutive numbers. And I mean, let's face it, every time a law has to be implemented, it is because it has harmed an overwhelmingly amount of people. That's why it gets to be a law. You know, the idea or the notion that you're thinking that, oh, you know, it ain't a law, therefore you can do it, and that the law can't, you know, catch you, you know, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Then when some people have an honest mistake, you have abused some event or activity or situation, you know, they don't even understand why it's a problem when they were making an honest mistake, but you ruined it for the people who are making honest mistakes, and they're being treated as if they're like you, just taking advantage of a situation.